Welcome to episode 58 of the Filmumentaries podcast. As promised, I've managed to jam this episode into September. It's the 30th of September, but hey, when I make a promise, I'm good for it. If you're new to the podcast, thanks for joining. You have about 1 hour of film history chat ahead of you. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. And I really appreciate you coming back and listening again. If you'd like to support the podcast, it is just me and my laptop and a guest. You can visit patreon.com/Jamie Benning. There are several tiers to choose from with different perks. Right, it's very late here in London, so I'm going to crack on with this. Today's guest is a writer, a showrunner, a podcaster, and original props collector by the name of Ryan Condal. I mean, he's the writer and showrunner on the world's biggest show right now, House of the Dragon on HBO. I'm going to start this conversation recording just before we properly began recording because Ryan was talking about being a fan of a certain awkwardly named film history project made by somebody from southeast London. Wonder who that could be.
Yeah, I love them. I loved your Filmumentaries. I mean, I've known them for years. I mean, I you can tell from my background. I'm steeped in all this stuff, and from the period that you and I both love so deeply. And then I'm a big podcast guy. It's the way I pass long commutes either by car or by train, and I have a bunch of them in London. So yeah, so I've really, your podcast became one of my regulars every time something new would pop up. That was one of the first go-tos because I love how it's a unique format because the podcast format in general is just nobody. There's never been a format before where you can go as deep, sort of as granular with a guest on one particular topic. Talking to Nilo Rodas-Jamero about his industrial design background and then segueing into the costumes. That would be a 10-minute segment maybe on some documentary somewhere, but never an hour in his whole career. And I just and I think you've really exploited it in this particular period and subject matter that I'm very interested in. So cool. So good on you, and great on you for sourcing these really interesting people that we just never hear from that have worked on these giant films.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I always think, the credits go by and everyone has got a story. I mean, some of them are not going to be great, but I'm sure there are people that do have great stories. And Nilo is one of those guys. I mean, I kind of fell in love with Nilo. Just, he's the nicest guy. He's so sweet. He sends me like a Christmas card. He occasionally sends me an email, saying, have you seen this? And the same with Walter Murch as well. Walter Murch emails me, which is crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I mean, that's great. I mean, I knew who Nilo was, and I knew his interesting story of kind of being, going from essentially being somebody from the art department that gets made into a costume designer. But I didn't know all this, the stuff that he talked about, and really I'd never heard his voice before, so it was just really interesting. That one really stuck out to me. Of your kind of last year stuff. I actually have I haven't been commuting that much, so I have a backup, and I actually checked today, and I was like, oh, there's a bunch of really interesting new interviews on here, so I can't wait to catch up.
Good. Well, I might include a few little snippets of that if that's cool with you, that we just talked about.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So that aside, here's the proper conversation with writer, collector, podcaster Ryan Condal, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Ryan, you were born in 1980 or so, right? So you're a little bit younger than me, but I'm guessing you're a VHS kid.
I'm a VHS kid. I was born in the very late 70s.
Right.
Yes, but so I'm like the last gasp of Generation X, and definitely a VHS kid.
What was the film that kind of got you hooked? Was there one that kind of went in that VCR over and over again?
I mean, it was definitely Star Wars. I mean, there was no question, but it was all of that stuff. I mean, the Indy trilogy, still Last Crusade is near and dear to my heart. You can see some of the the gear behind me.
Hmm.
That was the only one of those films that I was able to see in the theater. I know that I saw Return of the Jedi in the theater because my dad took me, but I was so young at the time. I have a memory of going. I don't have a memory of seeing it. I have a memory of like walking into the theater, but I don't,
Hmm.
for whatever reason, because I think it blurs together with watching it on VHS so many times. I
Sure.
don't have that memory of seeing it for the first time. But Last Crusade was the first movie, the first indie movie, the first of the sort of Lucas, septology or
Yeah.
sexology, I guess, that I was able to see theatrically. So I just, it's imprinted on my brain, but that's because that VHS generation, and Alien and Aliens, and certainly attempting Blade Runner many times until I finally got it when I was in
Yeah,
high
same.
school.
Exactly the same. Yeah. I remember
And
hiring it once, and it was the original cut, and thinking, oh, it's another Harrison Ford kind of sci-fi movie. Oh, this isn't what I expected. And it wasn't until the director's cut came out that I think it started to get that momentum again, and draw us all in.
yeah, I think that was what finally happened. I think in college, I finally sat down in the DVD, the beginning of the DVD era, and sat down with the director's cut. And I remember this sort of goofy voiceover version. I was sort of, I kind of knew, oh, they're doing Casablanca. It's that sort of old
Mm.
detective movie thing. Okay, that's sort of interesting. And then I think I saw it on a bigger screen with the director's cut in widescreen with the nice, I like wired my TV into my big Iowa speakers, so I had the big booming. And then once you heard the Vangelis score, I think, come through, once it was a theatrical experience or something approaching it, then I was like, oh, okay, I get this, and I see all the beautiful design when I'm not watching on a really crappy overrun VHS version of
Mm.
it, but when it's
Mm.
a nice crisp DVD picture. But yeah, all that's, RoboCop and Predator and Princess Bride, and all the great comedies, the Steve Martin comedy. I lived in VHS, but it was interesting because I uh though I was of an age where I really, would have been watching films really from the late 80s and 90s, I was kind of living in the mid 70s and early 80s because I was able to curate that as a VHS kid, and I was actually seeing more VHS stuff than I was seeing in the movie theater because I was a kid. So I, if wanted to go to the movie theater, had to be an outing with the family, had to plan it, had to go, I had to convince the parents to take you. And we went to the movies all the time, but it was just VHS was much more accessible. So I lived in that. And it's funny because I know you've either are talking to or will talk to my co-host David Mandel from the
Yeah.
Stuff Dreams Are Made Of, but he always sort of laughs because we're 10 years apart
Mm.
and we have a very similar movie taste, but he always mocks my comic book taste because our comic book is our comic book experience is 10 years apart because I didn't have that with comic books because I had to go buy what was new on the newsstand, so
Mm.
I couldn't go back and read the stuff I wanted to read, the stuff from when he was a kid. So we just have this very different thing. But yeah, I lived in the I could have been a VHS tape as a kid.
And did you, like so many of us, kind of find after a while, you kind of got past the movie itself, and then you were more interested in how it was made and behind the scenes and all of that kind of stuff? Were you one of those kids that would buy the magazines that told us
Yeah.
those stories?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember books more for whatever reason, and I think that was those early kind of Lucasfilm books, the
Hmm.
the making ofs, and they were one of the only companies that was doing those real the coffee table books with
Yeah.
pictures and things that
The
showed you
art
the
of Star Wars and the art of Empire, and yeah.
yeah, and the material that was made, for the movie. And then honestly, I remember kind of Starlog magazine, sort of oddly, and there was a Starlog store, like a shop front in the Garden State Plaza Mall, my mall in New Jersey where I went. So I was always in there, and they always had that magazine stocked. And I sort of remember Cinefantastique and a couple of the others, but Starlog sticks out in my brain. And I remember in the lead up to Terminator 2, I remember getting the Starlog, the advance, and they showed you how they did a bunch of how they were doing a bunch of the effects and the practical effects. And there was this whole, I remember, page showing how Cameron got that crazy point of view, and Arnold almost points the shotgun down the lens of the camera, and it's just off camera, but it makes you feel like he's pointing it at you. And it was talking about this, even though this movie is going to have computer graphics in it, there's this great practical effect. I mean, that's an old school movie making effect. And I was older then, but that was when because back when I was watching Star Wars as a kid, that stuff was real to me.
Yeah.
Space, they were traveling through space, lightsabers were real, all that stuff was real. But once you started to realize, oh, this is movie magic that's being made, then I got really, as you said, got really interested in how that stuff was done,
Mm. Star
and
Wars is
the
kind of
artistry behind it.
Star Wars is kind of singular in that way. I think where, as a kid, you feel like you can live in the universe, and as a kind of teenager, young adult, you feel like you could make something like that. You could be involved in making something like that because, a lot of the people. When I found out a lot of the crew were British, I was kind of like, wow, And then there was Elstree Studios, and we would drive up there and just drive past Elstree, and it felt kind of within reach. And I think that's one of the things that Star Wars does for me above any of the other movies from that time. All the others felt a bit kind of, I mean, maybe Indiana Jones as well being shot over here. But as soon as I found out that Elstree was this kind of cornerstone of production in the 70s and 80s, I just kind of wanted to get involved. I never made it, but, the intention was there. You, however, you're now doing the biggest show in the world right now. Where did it start for you? Because from what I understand, you were in a completely different career before you made the jump to movies.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I was. That was out of fear and practicality, I think. This is always the thing that I wanted to do. I mean, from the earliest time that I can remember, once I gave up paleontology, I think, at some point in my young years as a career pursuit, I wanted to be a writer, specifically a writer, and for whatever reason, I wanted to be a writer of books, a novelist. And then I had this great teacher. I went to this magnet school, they would call it in the US, as a high schooler, and they had it was sort of an experimental school where they were trying to they were trying to treat a high school like university. So you went to school from 8:30 in the morning until 4:30 in the afternoon. It was very intense. It was very science, math, and technology focused. So you took biology, chemistry, and physics all at the same time. Lots of there was this crazy computer labs, really well funded kind of school. They drew kids from all over this county to try to do this thing, but they would pull teachers from industry, and we had our humanities teacher that covered, essentially covered literature and writing, was somebody that was out of the development world, and he had all these great careers, and he was a English major himself, but had worked in development at Disney back in the 80s. And this was like, I think either freshman or sophomore year, it was very early. And he taught a course on screenplay structure, movie structure. No idea that stuff existed. I think I vaguely knew that movies were written things because I had those illustrated screenplays from Star Wars and Indiana Jones. But for me, the author of the movie, as is for most people, was the director. It was George Lucas. It was Steven Spielberg. It was James Cameron. I he so he so he essentially taught us 3-act structure, the very basic sort of Sid Field 3-act structure, and then showed us The Hero with 10,000 Faces, the Joseph Campbell, book that broke down basically the Rosetta Stone of all myth and storytelling through all time. And then he showed us
journey, yeah,
Hero's Journey, exactly. And then he showed us Star Wars, my favorite film, and showed us how that was Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, and how Obi-Wan was the strange wizard, and how the lightsaber was the magic sword, and how Luke, going to Mos Eisley was crossing the threshold, and the Death Star was the belly of the whale. And it broke my brain. It was so, math and science, applying a formula, forgive the term, applying I don't know, anything, an equation, an algorithm to this thing that seems like just a pure work of art out of one person's brain, just broke me. And then it was like, okay, well, I wanted to be a writer, but I really love movies, so why don't I just become a screenwriter? And I decided it then and there at 14 or 15, that was all I wanted to do. That was all I ever wanted to do. And then it just became a life pursuit from there. And how do I figure this out? How do I meet people? How do I read? You lived by Elstree Studios. I lived by the RKO Cinema on Route 4 in Paramus. I mean, there was nothing out there, anything like that. So it was about finding books and just trying to, going to New York City and buying those screenplays off of the street vendors' carts and trying to just read, because the internet was sort of in its nascent stages, but there were no real scripts. Drew's Scriptorama kind of came around, and that was a great place to go find things to read. But it was just hard to find that stuff. So I became a forager, sort of trying to find any information that I could about how this stuff is done, and then started trying to write myself, and on it went. And then eventually it connected, some 8 years after university. But I went to school and got decided I was going to pursue this on the side, but I got a real degree in, quote unquote real degree in business, and then that became a marketing career, which became an advertising career, just because I knew that I had to sort of be Batman. I had to be Bruce Wayne during the day, and go out and be a screenwriting crime fighter at night, and I figured it out that way, because I knew I didn't have anybody that was going to kiss me into the industry or give me an internship on a great big film. It was going to be merit based. If I was going to break in, somebody had to read something that I wrote and think it was of merit. And eventually, it took many, many years, but eventually that happened, and then gave birth to a career.
And then when you've created a script that kind of gets picked up and it's on the blacklist and all that kind of stuff, how did you keep that momentum going? Because you've been writing fairly prolifically since then. How do you keep that momentum from that first script? Because I know people that have had success with a script, it gets bought and the film may not get made, and that was everything they had. They put everything into that one script.
Yeah.
How did you carry that momentum on?
I think it was hard work. It was really just, it was hard work and entrepreneurship. I knew from the very beginning, I still don't think this. I still think I don't think what I do is particularly magical. I think I've learned a craft over time, and I've worked really, really hard at it. And I would used to tell everybody, I'm the hardest working guy you're going to meet. I'm going to do all of the drafts. I'm going to take your notes. I'm going to go back again and again and again. I'm going to develop a pitch that goes way over. I'm going to way over deliver on my pitch in terms of detail, so you know exactly what you're buying. I've just always taken that approach, because I was looking at this and it's like, okay, as a business major, how do you go in and offer a unique service to somebody? And a lot of people, I think, walk around on their talent, and good for them. Obviously I've been able to put this together. I know how to do this enough, but my thing was, what is the actual thing that I can, the tangible thing that I can hang my hat on? And that was always just hard work. I was like, I can sit in the chair for more hours. I can outwork the next guy. I can be up earlier in the morning, go bed later at night. And that was always the approach that I took. So really my prolificness was the result of just, a somewhat mental dedication to doing what I did, to try to stay in. Because I had seen so many people, as you were kind of alluding to, that break in and then wash out. And what's worse than having your dream kind of in your hands and then having it kind of sift through like so much sand? And that was always the fear that kept me going. So and look, I had, I busted on projects. I would hand in drafts and get fired. I worked in features. I had a lot of, tough things that happened all the way along. I handed in good things that were really, really well done. Some of the best I've ever written that happened to. It happens. But my thing was always keep the plate spinning, always have more irons in the fire, be writing specs, be chasing things, go into television, be pitching pilots and things like that. So I think it was just, this sort of focused dedication to it, and having some luck along the way, and just having enough things connect, along the way. You finally get a feature credit, and you get a pilot made, and then and then you're the guy that got that pilot made, and then other people want to hire you to write their pilot, because you have that magic sauce that everybody's looking for. Overnight success that took 8 years, and and then 15 hard years of work since then.
Do you know, we've actually crossed paths, not kind of in person, but I was actually in Budapest when Hercules was being shot.
I heard you talk about that on your
with Brett
podcast.
Ratner.
Yes,
Yeah,
I was not. So you actually were, were on the Hercules set, and I was not. So hey,
yeah,
there you go. There you go. You eclipsed me, Jamie.
yeah. That was a funny evening, a funny
Yeah, what
afternoon and
was
evening.
what? How can remind me of the story of how you got
I, I
how you ended up on that set?
I was at home and I got a message on Facebook from Brett Ratner's assistant saying Brett wants to meet you. He loves Inside Jaws and Raiding the Lost Ark.
Right. Yeah, it was a
He's
fan.
in
Yeah.
Budapest. And I said, well, I'm going to Budapest tomorrow. I was there for the Formula One Grand Prix. Just this happenstance, and then I went down there and yeah, all of that stuff happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just funny that, we've got a mutual friend in Dan Lanigan as well. And he's built like Hercules. But,
He is. Yes.
but
He's
no,
a
that,
Chicago god.
he is. Um, I have seen over the years, many films that have kind of come and gone. I've seen scripts that have been made into things that haven't quite made it, and I've seen you involved with things over the years in the press. One of those films that keeps coming up again and again is the remake of Logan's Run. You were involved with that at some point, but again, it's in the press this week. I think that it might
Oh, really?
it might rear its head again. Yeah.
Great. I mean, I think that's I would love to see that film get made. Yeah, I worked on it for probably about a year, something like I want to say 6 or 7 years ago at this point. And this was Joel Silver's passion project forever. I mean, when I came in for the meeting on the job, he's told me in somewhat of a piece of foreshadowing, he said, I've been trying to get this movie made since before The Matrix. So there you go. And it was I think 1996 was when he first got the rights for that. And it was just always a passion thing for him. And he's been through directed this murderer's row of directors and actors and things like that. And it just never got going. I mean, it's a great title. What a great title and a great concept. I mean, Logan's Run, right there. You see the movie poster, you know what it is. I want to know who's Logan, what's he running from? It sounds science fiction. It's one of those perfect titles. The problem is you don't have this huge built-in audience. I mean, the movie was what it was. It was a relic of the time. A friend of mine sort of very wisely said to me at some point, Logan's Run was the last science fiction film before Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And because it was made in 1976, and Star Wars essentially broke films like Logan's Run. You could never make Logan's Run. You couldn't make Logan's Run in 1978.
No.
Once Star Wars hit, you could never make that film again. And I think now if you go back and watch it, which I did obviously for the job, you have that experience in watching it. So I think there are people that liked the film back in the day, but you don't have 10 million people who are dying to see a Logan's Run. So you have to sell this kind of new idea to them to get them in. And ultimately the thing that stands against that movie is, but there are two things. One is, how do you make a movie that only has young people in it, but not make it a young adult film, right? Because for that film to work, to justify the expense that you're going to spend on it, it has to work for a wide audience, young adults and adults. And then two, is the pure expense of the thing, because it has to exist almost in this entirely constructed world. There can't be anything from our world in it until a certain point. When you reveal what's actually going on under the dome or whatever. And I think those two things stand in opposition to one another. And I think people get really intoxicated by the idea of making this thing. And then they get down the road and they realize this is going to be a $300 million movie. And where are we going to make this? And who's the filmmaker that we're going to entrust with this? And what's, it's Warner Brothers. So is Warner Brothers going to invest this to try to make a new franchise? And that's one of those ones I'm really, really deeply proud of the work that I did on that. I love that, that screenplay. And I just, in talking to Joel afterwards, it was, he had seen that particular episode happen 10 times through the development period, where they got really, really excited. I mean, I was way down the line. I was doing page notes, daily with Greg Berlanti, who was attached to produce and perhaps direct the thing, in his office, going over it. We were talking about cast for, who you're going to cast as Logan. We were really, really far. And the studio obviously is, Warner Brothers deeply invested in Greg Berlanti. It just fizzled. It fizzled in the end. And it's a shame, because I think that, I think if they did take the plunge on it with the right pieces, filmmaker, actor, script, you would have a new franchise, I think.
Mm, mm. And what do you think it is about your personality that enables you to take these knocks but still keep forging forward? You talked about the hard work and everything, but is there something inherent in you? Is there something you've inherited from your parents maybe that has given you this drive?
I mean, I would like to say there was. I mean, it's fear. It's really just you. Just, I mean, you have to just pick up, and keep going. And it's every time it hurt. It's not that it doesn't hurt. It hurts every time. I think, I think I've just learned to accept it as part of the process, embrace it, and then carry on. And the best way to, it's the best way to get over a heartbreak is to find a new relationship, and that relationship is your next script or screenplay. You have to. I mean, I've had, TV series canceled. I've had pilots passed on. I've my first credit, and this might lend to an answer to your question. What should have been my first credit was this movie called Paradise Lost, which I'd been working on with Legendary Pictures for over a year. They were going to Warner Brothers was going to distribute it. This is back in the day of right in the middle of the Chris Nolan Batman era, when Legendary was that. If you were me, that was the place you wanted to be working.
Sure.
It was like, I imagine that's what working at Lucasfilm would have been back in the back in the early 80s. So I was so thrilled to be there, and I worked on this thing for a year and a half. And Alex Proyas was attached as director. I moved to Sydney for the summer back in 2011. Worked on the film for 8 weeks there, doing production rewrites for Bradley Cooper, who was going to play Lucifer, and Casey Affleck was Gabriel. Jaimin Hansu was the Angel of Death. I mean, it was such a great cast, and they had done. I mean, I saw Bradley. They'd scanned his body to create a fully like the avatar, a performance captured 3D fully photoreal version of Lucifer at different stages, when he's the beautiful, God's chosen angel, and then when he's burned, when he makes the descent, and then when he rises again as Satan. There's sort of 3 stages, and they were just gorgeous. I mean, gorgeous. And what a great story. I mean, one of the best stories ever written. And I remember standing in Alex Proyas's office right before I left to get back on the plane to go back to LA, and I said, I realize this is a really newbie question, so just bear with me because I'm a young, excited screenwriter. But I said, the train has left the station, right? I mean, there's no way they're not making this movie. And I remember the look on his face. He blinked and like shook his head as though the thought had not even entered his brain. And this is a person who's been doing this for a million years and has seen every. And he said, "Oh, no. They've spent way too much money." Again, bad foreshadowing. And they did. I mean, they spent a lot of money on that. And then a host of things happened. The biggest of which was they were in business with this visual effects vendor that was essentially, there were so many visual effects in the film that they essentially had to buy into an equity partnership with a visual effects vendor who was going to share in the profit and success of the film, that would take it on and basically do it on, they would pay their teams obviously, but then do everything else on spec, and then just share in the in the success or failure of the film. And they went like belly up during production, and it just broke the ability to put that film out. And so I remember I was at home, and I found out on Deadline. I just happened to open Deadline, and said, Paradise Lost, Legendary pulls the plug, and nobody called me. And they called later in the day, and I had no credits. That was all I was doing for a year and a half. That was my job. That was my full-time job. I didn't even have a job to go to the next day. So after that happened,
yeah, what do you do?
And I did. I mean, I started again. I started from square one. I went out. I actually got, I changed representation at that point because I just needed a completely new start. And 6 months later, I was back working again. I had a pilot and got, working on a feature. But I just said to myself, I remember the way I felt that day, and I just said, "This is crazy. I can never let this job do that to me again." And feel that way, and get into a place where I don't have anything else going on, and this is the only thing. And I just sort of play. And I also once recovering from the grief of that happening, I just realized that, and I know this might be bad foreshadowing again, but I'm going to say it anyway. It can never be that bad again, because bad things can happen, but and then now bad things can happen, and I have a credit, and I have a nice, I have a wonderful family, which I did not have at the time. And there's all these things that have come together, and also I have a much better perspective on this. And it's not I don't live and die on these things and be all end all. But that was pretty bad. So that one helped, because once recovering from that, it's sort of like, well, it can't be Paradise Lost again. So.
But all of those experiences have got you to where you are now, haven't they? And you can't take that away from where you are now. I mean, you're the
Correct.
showrunner. I mean, I've said to people that I'm interviewing the showrunner on House of the Dragon, they go, "Wow, I love that show. What's a showrunner?" Because in the UK we don't really use that term. And a couple of I put out to Twitter that I was talking to you, and a couple of people said, "What is a showrunner? Is it an executive producer? Is that its equivalent?"
Yeah, I mean, the best I can term it, and it's somewhat of a crude analogy, is essentially the showrunner is the feature film director of television. I'm not directing, to be very clear, which immediately was what the hell do you do? But the way George Lucas, when he made Star Wars, I mean, more like George Lucas when he made Empire Strikes Back. Let's say that he was the the mind behind the project. Of course, this is something I did not create this world. George R.R. Martin created this world, so we've co-created this project together. But all the creative decisions, the casting, the hiring of crew, picking your art department, designing dragons, hiring the directors. Miguel Sapochnik and I were partnered on the first season. We were co-showrunners. It was an odd thing because it's sort of not odd, but unique thing in the sense that in most cases, if there's a show running team, they tend to both be writers, like David and Dan were, David Benioff and Dan Weiss in the original show. And he did the directing wing and I did the writing wing. And then we blended over in the middle with the sort of, casting the show and hiring a production designer and things like that. But that job that George did as the sort of executive producer, the top creative person on the show, that's my job. I'm also the lead writer, so I oversee all the writing of the scripts, and I have a wonderful team because I could not possibly write 600 pages all by myself. I have a wonderful team who supports me. We break the story in the room, and then we assign off scripts. We go off on our own. It all filters through me. I give notes. They go back and do them, and then at the end of this process, we have 10 scripts. And then I'm on set every day, and I'm talking to not just the director, but multiple directors, because you have multiple directors on a television show, working with them all, making sure that we're all singing off the same hymn book, that the look and feel and tone of the show is consistent from director to director, because you want people to come in and feel like they're watching a cohesive piece that comes all through, sort of one creative vision, even though there are different directors of photography and directors and often writers on the script, but it's about tonal alignment. So it's a nebulous job because it means wearing 35 different hats. But essentially you are the chief creative on the show, and all of the creative decisions, for better or for worse, come through you. You answer a lot of questions as a show.
Yeah, I can imagine that's all you get all day long. Forgive my ignorance, but do you shoot episodes simultaneously sometimes, or do you just shoot episode 1, finish that, and start episode 2? Or like in a film where you would schedule things that take place in the same set, do you do that across a series as well?
Yes to all those questions. Yeah, I mean, it is a hybrid. It's very much a cross-bordered show. So we were, some days and we have two main units running at the same time. So essentially every shoot day is 2 shoot days, because we have a fire unit and a blood unit shooting always from a different episode, because it has to be you have to be two different directors essentially
Mm-hmm.
shooting. So, but you could walk from U stage to T stage, and there are two episodes going on the very same day. So
Right.
you'd walk out of one uncut and then wait for the light to stop burning on the other one, walk in, and there's a whole different show happening over there with different casts, obviously, because you can't share sets or directors or casts, and it's a bit of a scheduling Tetris, but that's how that all sorted out. And then as you go through the schedule, you're kind of all over the map in terms of what episode you're shooting, because you're looking to group things, because obviously when you're doing that, you have to make that day, that tandem day they call it, work. You have to find two different directors who are available to shoot that day with different groups of cast and on different sets, and that means basically you're pulling from any episode, which can be challenging for certainly for the production, but also for the actors, because they have to act kind of all out of order, and they can't build a sequential performance. It's deeply challenging. But then when you go to location, we went to Spain and Portugal for 8 weeks. That was all, you shot all that stuff at once. So it became very much like a film location shoot would be. You go shoot out the whole location, because you don't want to be going back and forth, because it gets very time consuming and expensive, especially with COVID quarantines and things like that.
Yeah. And what kind of dictates, because I see you've kind of adopted the technology of the volume, as I would call it, like on The Mandalorian with the Unreal Engine and everything. But what dictates your use of that as opposed to going to Spain or Portugal? What's appropriate, and when? Are there limitations with that technology that mean that you do need to go to these locations?
Yes, there is a limitation. It's a very specific tool. It's a wonderful tool, but for our show, it's a very specific tool. Other shows have kind of thrived on it and lived in that world, and I think it works for them because it's part of the look of that show. But because House of the Dragon / Game of Thrones thrives in practical, real environments, you have to use it very targeted and specifically in order for it to blend in with the look of the rest of the show. Thrones thrives on being in real locations, boots on the ground in hard to access locations, like medieval Spain, like Cornwall, and locations all over the UK where there are castles, or where there are old growth forests, so places where you don't have houses and shopping malls. But that's what gives you that texture that makes it feel like you're in a real place. So the challenge with the volume is where and how do you use it that blends in with those wonderful practical sets that we built and makes it work. And this season was largely a learning experience, because really, I think with the exception of this guy, Ryan Began, who is the Warner Brothers sort of visual effects executive who's running the volume, who came out here to help us run it, no one on her production had ever used it before. Any filmmaker, Miguel had never been in it before. He had seen it. He was fascinated by it. And it was really cool. And the actors had never stood on it. I mean, it was so great to see, because people would walk on set and these veteran actors would come on and be like, "This is amazing." It was like walking into Disneyland. They couldn't believe it, because they walked on a set. They were used to working on a green screen stage, and then you walk onto Dragonstone Bridge, and you're standing on this bridge, which is a physical set that you've built in the sort of physical space of this thing, and you walk on the bridge and you're looking up the bridge at Mist and then Dragonstone Castle, and it looks real to your eye, and it's crazy.
Do you have that issue? I've never been in that situation in a volume or anything, but do you have issues with your own eyes focusing on what looks to be 250 meters away, but is actually only like 30 yards away or something?
It does play with your brain, and people. Yeah. I noticed the cast got very tired acting in that, and I think it was just it could have been those monitors do tend to suck the air out of the room, and it's the hottest stage that you'll work on because of the running computers. But I also think it's that you're in front of a giant TV screen that takes up your whole, not just your main vision, but all of your peripheral vision all at once. And I think it overstimulates and overexcites your brain while you're working. And also you're trying to focus on acting and performing and all that. But what it does really great is it's a great production tool for a targeted use for a location or a set that you need to shoot in sort of economic chunks. So that Dragonstone Bridge, we had 4 days on that bridge worth of material, Um, but so it didn't make sense to go build a bridge in a real location. It didn't make sense to go back to the real location because there was a real location from the original series, but that bridge was so high you could only shoot up the bridge and down the bridge. You couldn't get, there was no crane in the world that could get up to get you a profile shot. So which we were able to get with this creation. The other great thing is you'll see it in the show. There are two scenes on that bridge, and one is at essentially sunrise and one is at sunset. And being able to shoot 2 days straight of a 10-hour sunrise where the sun doesn't move and gives you beautiful interactive light that dapples off the armor, and you get that. It's the Revenant. It's shooting at magic hour for all that time without having to show up for 2 hours a day in chunks over a 6-week shooting schedule. And so even though the volume is very expensive to shoot on because of the high rental costs and everything, it makes it a good choice when you're doing, we need to go to that location once, or we're going to shoot on this set that we want to build once. Does it make sense to build a £1.5 million set, or do we spend 2 days on the volume, build a little practical set piece in the front, and then render the rest of the thing in the Unreal Engine? So that's how we've started to think about using. I think this year we're like, oh, let's do that there and let's do that there, and some things worked better than others. I mean, you do end up in certain cases you have to, even though you have the full screen in camera, you do have to go back in visual effects and either sweeten it or replace it. It becomes a big green screen,
right?
All possible, but the real benefit of it is in theory, I'm looking at something in the camera, then it's not a visual effects shot. Thus, I don't have to worry about it in post-production, which is the ideal thing. But of course, that they're still figuring that out. I mean, 10 years, this will be so much better than it is now, which is ours was so much better than the one they used in the first season of The Mandalorian, because that's how fast the technology moves.
And useful for pickups, I would imagine, as well. Like if you needed to do a pickup shot that you didn't get on location or something, or the story's developed to a point where you needed an extra shot, rather than flying back out to Portugal, you could recreate it potentially.
It's funny you say Portugal. So there was a particular location we had in Portugal where we had this beautiful location and we just got fogged out. So you have this amazing location on a mountaintop. You can see 300 miles in every direction. And we just got fogged out, and the fog lifted halfway through the day. So now you can suddenly see this beautiful location, but we shot the key parts of the wides of the scene in fog. So to match it, we rebuilt that set in the volume, fogged it up with atmosphere, and recreated. They LiDAR scanned the location, put it on the back screen, then fogged it up, and you can't you see the episode, you can't even tell what it is, but it was used. And we didn't shoot any. There was no dialogue shot. It was just pickups, little pieces of the scene to stitch the sequence together. We were able to go back and cut the scene together and know exactly, I need this shot and that shot and that shot. It was like 7 shots, and they just went in on the day and got all these close-ups, but it was beautiful for that. And you see the episode, you can't tell.
That's very cool. And being in charge of the writing, I mean, leaning into the future as you are with the writing for this series, it must be fun, but also the complexity must be kind of mind-blowing. If I think of prequels, I think of George Lucas, of course, and he wrote over some of the things that we know and love in the original trilogy with the prequels. How do you go about not tripping over those hurdles? Do you have like a Bible of Game of Thrones lore, something like that? Do you have experts? Do you have fans?
I mean, yes, we have all those things, but I'm also a fan myself. I mean, I've loved these books deeply for over 20 years, and steeped very very deeply in them myself. And I know enough about the world that I know how to go find the thing if I need to know it. And I also I have the voice of the characters in my head and the kind of cadence and rhythm of the way George writes. So, which, helps deeply. I know the history of the world, well enough. I know the geography of the world. I know where things are, where castles are, who's loyal to who, who's a bannerman of who. So that all makes it easier to write and be facile with the world. We also have access to some wonderful people who are that, the kind of lore masters, what's his name over at Lucasfilm,
Dave
Pablo
Filoni and
and
those guys,
and the guy
Pablo
Hidalgo.
Hidalgo.
Yeah. So there's writer T. McKell who is essentially George's lore master, who was a consultant on season one, helped us in the writers' room, and then became a staff writer in season two. She's a writer herself and wrote actually a fantastic script this year. But I mean, you could phone her up right now and phone George up and start throwing trivia at them, and sometimes George would just go, "T, what's the answer to that one?" Because he has it in his head, but he knows where to go look it up. But I'm talking very, very granular, things that she just knows. So we have access to her. I have regular access to George. I text him all the time and I say, hey, what's the story with this guy? And did this person have a mother? And if so, what was her name?
Huh.
And so it's nice to have all that stuff. But yeah, it is a very demanding world. But I think much like the Star Wars universe, it's so fully three-dimensionally realized that's what makes it so fun to live in and work with.
And all the time you're doing this, you're trying to hit deadlines that have been set in stone. It must be stressful, but I can see that you still enjoy doing it. This is the world you've always wanted to be in, right? You wanted to be a showrunner on a big complex story like this.
Yeah. I mean, it's the dream job. It's the dream job. I mean, I got to do my dream job 15 years ago when my first screenplay was bought. So to be here doing this thing in a world where I'm deeply passionate about and getting to show run it is amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's the most stressful thing that I've ever done. I I was not really prepared for how stressful it is, because I've run a big series before, but not quite at this profile. And when you have something that's this profile, you get phone calls from people that you wouldn't normally get phone calls from. Good phone calls and sometimes harder phone calls. And it's all part of, I'm still processing it because I've just never experienced it before. But all your past experience informs what you do now, and you just kind of pick yourself up and put one foot in front of the other. And I have a great team, wonderful team surrounding me, both writers on the production side, great directors, fantastic cast. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. Essentially, we're all trying to make this great show. And it's a lot.
Yeah, I can see, for those listening and not watching the video, I can see behind you here that you've got in your London house, you have a bunch of original props from movies. I can see some Shining inspired wallpaper as well.
The wallpaper, yeah.
People say, and of course you have the podcast with David, the stuff that dreams are made of. People say to me, Jamie, you have a job and a wife and kids. How do you have time for a podcast? I'm not running the biggest show on TV right now. How do you have time to A, have this hobby of collecting, and B, turn it into a podcast with David?
Have you been talking to my wife? Yeah, I mean, honestly, we don't. Neither one of us has time. We've been off the air for a good bit now because the two of us, more me at this point. First Dave early in the summer, and then me just didn't have the time. We're going to come back in the fall. So stay tuned. But honestly, it's doing this crazy job as you also do. You need an outlet. You need to do something other than, even though it is us talking about movies and things, it doesn't feel like it is a total gear shift, because it's talking about things that I'm not responsible for delivering, the things that I loved as a kid, my hobby, which is, collecting. We don't have time for it, but it is tons of fun. And we've set up a really nice infrastructure too, where it took a season or so to figure out, but now really Dave and I show up on the day, we turn the camera on, we have an outline in front of us, the guest has been booked, there's this great platform that we use to record in. It's a browser-based platform called Riverside, and we just go, and then we have a great producer editor named Bart Taylor who takes it off and cuts it and then sends it off to mix, and it's great when it comes out. We don't really do anything other than the half hour of prep, some talking with the guests and figuring out shipping them equipment to get them to so they sound good on the thing, and then but kind of we have nice people who take care of all that stuff for us, and then we just go on and record, and it's a blast. I mean, it's a good podcast. It's great fun.
Yeah,
thanks. Yeah,
it feels like you guys, like, I think you've said this before, that you would be having those conversations anyway. So just being able to record them and make it into a podcast is an extra bonus.
Stick a mic under our nose and and hear us debating how much am I going to spend at this auction?
What
Yeah.
what was the first item then that made you think, oh shit, I'm now a collector of movie props? Like, what? Because you were into kind of replicas at one stage, am I right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was always interested in, and it goes back to Starlog magazine. I was always interested in the kind of physical engineering that went into the making of
Mm.
films. And I was interested in these, beautiful, props and costume pieces that were built for the film. But back in 2009, when Battlestar Galactica wrapped, the Ron Moore series, there was this big auction that put on by Universal. Essentially, it was a studio sanctioned auction where they sold all the stuff. I mean, I remember walking in the preview room, and they had a full size Viper, like the one that Jamie Bamber used to
Mm.
climb into, and static, obviously, but full size. And they had everything. The whole production was there because they essentially Universal was going to keep a very small archive of the stuff to honor the production, but then the rest of it they had made whatever 6 seasons of it, and they said we have containers full of this stuff.
Yeah.
We should give it back to the fans, and it was incredibly successful. It was that you see more of those now, but at the time that was really, other than the big Star Trek auction in the mid 2000s, the That's a Wrap that Paramount did. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. And I went and I was a replica collector. This was early in my screenwriting career. I had a crappy apartment and no real overhead over my life. And so I just went and I said, oh, I think maybe I'll do some bidding. And I bid on this Viper helmet, and one of the pilot helmets, and I won it. And I got it home, and I plugged it in because it had this like battery pack, and it lit up, and it had these different light
Cool.
patterns went on, and you could turn all. I had the name tag of the character inside of it, just written on gaffer's tape, just stuck inside the way it would be in like a stormtrooper helmet, and it just blew my mind, and I just love that series so much. And I'm holding this thing, and I just looked at my little replica collection. I was like, I hate you. You'll never give me this kind of charge. And that was it. I was done. I sold all the replicas, and then I was full time, original movie prop collector, and I was all in, and I went. A friend of ours, this guy Brandon Allinger, who
Mm.
runs prop store in Los Angeles, was talking to him and saying how what else is out there. And he just saw the addled eyes of a future addict in front of him, and he said, "Well, what would you want?" And I was like, I want an M41A pulse rifle from Aliens. And he goes, I think I know where one of those is. And they knew they had this client who had one and was, done with it and wanted to sell it. And it was one of the, the original, aluminum shrouded heroes from James Cameron's Aliens. And they did a deal for me. They brokered it, and it came in. And I mean, the Viper helmet was cool because I had just seen that series on television, but I grew up with Aliens. I mean, VHS, and finding the special edition at the the Chiller Theater Convention, and the rip from the Laserdisc. I mean, I lived with that thing, and when that came in, it was just it just blew my mind. It was just the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And then at that point, it was just like, okay, that's it.
You're done. You're in.
It's all over. And then here we are, probably 12 years later.
So I can see behind you there a stormtrooper helmet. Is
Yes,
that what is
A
that? A
New
Jedi
Hope.
one or an Empire one? Or
A New Hope.
that's
Yeah,
a New Hope. Is it
yeah,
really?
yeah, yeah.
Blimey. I can see an indie whip,
Yep. Last Crusade.
indie hat. Yeah.
Yep.
I know
Yep.
Dan's got a couple of those jackets, hasn't he? And
Yeah.
costumes from.
And
Yeah.
he has the best indie collection outside of Lucasfilm, and I'm starting to wonder whether he might have a better indie collection than Lucasfilm does at this point. But yeah, it's incredible.
And what's that on
Yeah.
the bottom left?
That's the Master's sword, or the Father's sword from
Huh.
Conan,
Oh
1982
wow.
Conan, the one that
Gosh.
he's forging at the beginning, his
Yeah.
dad. Yeah. And
Amazing.
then Hudson's armor from Aliens on the other side,
Jeez.
a stunt pulse rifle, because unfortunately I can't have my hero out here in England because you
Oh,
guys are
yeah.
pretty strict about your laws, even though it is deactivated. It's so that lives in the US. So that's one of the biscuit foam stunt ones, which are great and gorgeous in their own
I've
right.
held
It's
one of
just
those before.
yeah,
Yeah, there was a guy who did a. I can't remember his name now. He's another one of you guys. He's got a big collection and he's got one of those. Yeah, and he let me carry it. And I can see a Batman
yep,
cowl there.
89. Yep. Batman 89,
Amazing.
Bat Symbol, and Cal, one of the used ones. It's had a bit of restoration work on it, but you can tell it was, you know, kind of been through the taking on and putting on and taking off Michael Keaton's head, and then Statler and Waldorf are up there. The
Incredible. I mean, what a great position to have them in as well, kind of looking down over
mock
everything, mocking
mocking
them.
me.
Yeah.
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 Nerd.
Blimey. That's fantastic. I mean, are there pieces that you have that you wish were here, like other than the
Yeah.
rifle you just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I had just gotten in LA to this place where I had this lovely detached garage with a big studio over it, and that was my office. And I just got to this place where I was really, this is it, my museum. And then I got this job, and we got greenlit, I guess, and then you're moving to London. I knew I had to fold it all up. So I mean, this is this is a decent representation of it. But I think I have big pieces. I have like a full spacesuit costume from Alien, the original, Tom Skerritt's whole,
Wow.
essentially, with a couple of pieces are missing that I've had replicas made to make it full. But I mean, essentially it's 85% of the whole costume
Huh.
on a mannequin. I have a bunch of larger pieces that just, with the size of housing here in London, just were not possible. So at some point I'll be back in the US and everything, Voltron will reassemble. But it's nice. I mean, I love this stuff, and it's just nice to have some of it out here because it's inspirational. It's
Mm.
looking up the work of my betters and my predecessors to either keep me motivated or remind me that you're not that good.
David tells me that he gets obsessed on particular movies, whereas you'll buy one kind of choice piece from that movie and move on to your next favorite movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have kind of a broad spread of interest. Although, I have said, in really thinking about it, essentially my interest lies between 1975 and 1989. And because I don't have anything from the 90s. I think there's a few things that I definitely would take, but I'm just not into collecting from modern films. I mean, I ended up actually selling that Battlestar helmet because I got really curated and focused. This is the stuff that I'm really interested in. The stuff that was made back in the studio era, when things were handmade for the film, before 3D printing and mass casting and all that, and before anybody knew that this stuff was going to be collectible. Because I think that's important to me, because now it's so hard with these Marvel films and the modern Star Wars films. The stuff is beautiful and great, but people know it's collectible, and there are people that work on the film that make things to take home, and sometimes they do it with no nefarious intent other than just, I would like my own stormtrooper blaster. But then if that thing gets out there, then the history of it can get a little bit muddy, and you're wondering, was this actually ever used in the film? So but really, I live in the nostalgia of my youth, and the things that excited me as a kid and made me want to work in movies myself. So I've really focused in on that period. But I do have a broad spectrum of interest, and as much as I have here, there are movies that I don't have anything to represent, like Princess Bride is a big one. The first Men in Black, one of the ones from the 90s, 2001. There's all these films that I would love to be able to find something from. Empire Strikes Back, which is my favorite Star Wars film. I have representations from Jedi and from A New Hope, but I don't have anything from Empire yet. So that sort of stuff, and it's patience and laying in wait and waiting for the right thing to come along and trying to jump on it.
How do you pick where you're going to go with this series, or how did you pick where you were going to go with this series? You got so many choices of the different houses to look at, the different families. When and how was the decision made to start where you've begun?
I mean, this was fairly preordained for me, because HBO had gone through a whole round of sort of successor show development. George likes to call these successor shows, not prequels or sequels. And they had discovered, they were searching for what was going to work, and they discovered, I think, a bunch of things that didn't work, and in that process became very fixated on the idea of doing a Targaryen prequel, focusing on the kind of the most famous house in the history of Westeros, the House of the Dragon. And so when George came to me with this assignment, it was not only this is a Targaryen show, this is the time period that I'm most interested in pursuing, because this was George's passion. He wanted to tell this particular story, that it's called The Dance of the Dragons. It's the kind of bloodiest, worst civil war in the history of the continent, and it happens during this period. So that was, again, kind of prescribed for me coming into this. But I always say this is sort of like what Lucas did when he went back and did the prequels, The Phantom Menace. We knew a little bit about the Jedi, but they were this kind of dying race when we saw them in the original trilogy. And I think us as kids always wanted to know. We always heard the stories of the old Republic and little snippets of dialogue. And what was it like when the Jedi were in a proper monastic order and and kept peace and justice throughout the galaxy? This similarly is, what was it like when the Targaryens were in power and ruled with dragons behind them, and there was this threat of, if you challenged them, you would get one of 17 dragons in your face. And I think that sort of the distant mountains of that, the escapist imaginative fantasy of that was the thing that I think HBO really hooked into, and as did I. I mean, as soon as George pitched it to me, I was like, oh yeah, of course, that's brilliant. Doing a Greek tragedy about the Targaryens at the height of their dynasty. That's amazing. It's like Rome, going back and exploring the Caesars at the height of the Caesars before they start to tear the dynasty apart.
It must be so exciting to sort of immerse yourself in that world again. And as a fan, as a somebody who loves those books and loves the TV series, you must have some moments where you just go, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" Right?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And but everybody that works on the show knows that I'm a giant nerd, and both in my collecting life, but also for these books. And I think most of them really embrace it because they realize that it's that passion is what has brought this thing to life. I mean, I really think that the reason this one is connected is because I know this world, and it's an extraordinarily faithful adaptation. And we have wonderful craftspeople and cast and all those things that go into it. But I think at the core of it is it's a series that's blessed by George, that feels very real and of his world. It does not feel like somebody doing a pastiche or trying to ape something, or or a commercial grab or anything like that. So I think they love that and embrace that. And the people like the costume designer and the production designer, the set decorator, when they come and talk to me about, I want to decorate this apartment, what was this person like, what was their backstory, and I can actually in most cases have answers for them. I think they really thrive in that, and they really like having that kind of access to to the writer, or in a way through me to George. And I think they revel in it, and and much of the crew actually listens to the podcast too, because they're just, it's funny because the artisans that work on the show love that I love the stuff, because most times the director looks at it and goes, oh yeah, that's really cool, let's go shoot it. But for me, it's like, how did you build this, and tell me the process that went into this, and how many are there, and can I have one?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask this, with two of your hats on, as showrunner but as collector as well. Are there some pieces that you kind of, you're looking at kind of thinking that would look really good in my cabinet at home?
Of course. I mean, the stuff that they make it's all bespoke. It's all, again, artisans at the very top of their craft. It's gorgeous, and it's hard to not walk into those workshops and just be like, oh, this is all amazing, and take it all home. HBO has been fairly tough on that, but certainly things have found their way to me. Little things here and there that fell off the back of the truck, but yeah, I mean, it's so nice to be surrounded by that stuff and be able to see it all get made, which I think is a unique experience for me, because I'm seeing it before it becomes the piece of nostalgia that isn't that really memorable scene. I get to see it on the sort of factory floor, and then 6 months later it gets cut into an episode and becomes a thing that people are talking about. And I just love seeing my collection in that way, from that angle and perspective.
I think that's what's been cool talking to Dan Lanigan, David Mandel, and yourself, is that your passion for this stuff is not born out of the financial value of these pieces. It's the artistic value, and it's the nostalgia, and the fact that you kind of step out of each other's way as well. You know, if there's a particular piece you want, is there a particular piece that you still harbour? You know, like or still hanker for, like a Grail piece, or is part of the deal that you won't mention that because you don't want anybody to know what your Grail piece is?
No, no. I mean, there's always that thing. I mean, I've been very lucky in my collecting. I actually just sidestepped something for our friend Dan Lanigan
Mm.
in the last auction. I let him have at it, and it's great. I mean, he won it, so I was happy for him. It was a cool piece. But we do all that stuff all the time, and really it is as you're kind of getting at, largely about, for me at least, about the social interaction. I mean, you know, for me, there are collectors I think who are misers that that do the Ebenezer Scrooge approach, where they just, you know, hoard it to themselves, and you know, they will socialize, but sort of they're kind of eyeing what that next thing is. For me, that, you know, there certainly is the fun of the acquisition, but I love the interaction. I love walking into other people's collections and just getting to see these wonderful things. Oh my God, I can't believe that exists. You go to Dan's collection is so, and I'll call this one out because everybody knows he has it, but he has the original hero Blade Runner blaster
Yeah.
from Blade Runner, the one. There was only
Mm-hmm.
one ever made, and he has it, and it is the greatest thing I've ever seen. I love that movie, and just being in the presence of it is just so exciting. And I just, you know, of course I would love to own it, but the fact that Dan has it and I know where it is and I can go visit it and we
Yeah.
can talk about it, I just think it's so exciting. So I, you know, that definitely is a part of it. But in terms of Holy Grail, I mean, like I said, I've been very lucky to get most of the things that were highest on my hit list. I think, you know, I think I would love two Harrison Ford related things. I'm a huge Han Solo fan. He's my favorite character in the trilogy. I don't have anything Han Solo. I mean, I don't think I ever will. Prices have gotten pretty crazy. It actually, in a way, that sort of made it less enjoyable over the last couple of years, because it has become such a,
Yeah.
particularly over COVID, it just became one of these. It was never cheap,
Mm.
but it's some pieces in particular have gotten so insane that it's just like, well, even if I had that, I can't see investing that sort of money in something like that. And it's made it, you know, it's made choices a little more difficult in recent times. Uh but definitely a Han Solo piece. And then I think I have a wonderful indie collection. It's desperately missing a jacket. I would love to have an indie jacket. And but I don't know. There aren't that many in private hands. Our friend of the podcast has one, which is wonderful. And but that would definitely be a thing, because I have the hat and the whip, and I just think that sort of as a hat whip jacket would be a wonderful trilogy. Sort of, that's done, you know, put it in the corner, throw a spotlight over it, call it a day.
So where are you going to go with season 4 of the podcast then? What's to be covered? What's to be tackled next?
Well, I think we need to do a podcast crossover, Jamie. I think we have to have you on. We do want to do an episode where we talk about, we did a making of books episode where, you know, the library, but I think the film library episode is coming, where we talk about the great making of film documentaries. And I think you would certainly have a unique perspective in on that. So I think that's something that,
cool.
if you're up for it, we would love to do
I'm
with
up
you.
for it. Yeah, definitely.
And then we'll do another auction catalog page turn. I think we're going to open the season with a particular artisan from House of the Dragon, who made some really interesting stuff that's very near and dear to my heart for that show. Just to you know, talk about some of that stuff, because he has not been talked to publicly before, and talked about this particular project that I hired him to put him on. And then you know, just a couple of other collectors. You know, we have a host of ideas that we want to go. I think we want to do another deep dive. People seem to really like those crazy deep dives that we do, where we spend 2.5 hours talking about, like, the Stormtrooper helmet or the M41A pulse rifle. So we want to do another one of those, where you go into the, you know, deep granular nerdiness. And but the collectors love that. I mean, that's why they collect. They love to hear all that stuff. So but we have a bunch of stuff planned. It's just about finding the time to do it. But we will get back on that podcast wagon shortly.
Great. I think that's a nice place to end it, finishing on the podcast. Thanks so much for your time. And I'm glad we finally got to chat. And
Yeah, this is great. I would love to hang out. I would love to actually get a beer with you at some point when my life calms down. At the end of September, things will return somewhat to normal as I'm
let's
just
do it,
doing
definitely.
prep. But we should get together because I feel like you have a lot of stories that I would love to hear.
Yes, and likewise. All right, man. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Great talking. Okay. All right. Talk soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ryan Condal there. Thanks for your time, Ryan. It was great to finally meet you, and let's keep our word on meeting for that beer. I think late September is gone, but let's hope we can do it in October. Next up on the Filmumentaries podcast is Jim Bloom, ex-Lucasfilm producer. You may have seen Jim recently in one of the episodes of Light and Magic on Disney+. Jim and I have had to cancel a couple of times, but we're rescheduling for next week, so look out for that early to mid-October. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.